Hey guys, Desolator Magic back, and it's time for what you've all been waiting for. It's my other Cryptolith Rite deck. And you know this is going to be a good video, and this is like the 28th attempt at recording the first 10 seconds of my video. Screw it, I'm just going to keep going. Anyway, this is not as powerful or as effective as my other Cryptolith Rite deck, which is of course Cryptowhite, but it is definitely more defensive, and it's more likely to win in the long run. Well, as long as you don't get rushed by humans or werewolves too quickly. So, this deck is capable and built specifically to defend against really quick aggro rushes, and it's practically immune to control. I mean, no amount of control will stop this deck, of course, but you really need to start with the right cards to stop that level of aggro. So, it's sensitive, it's sort of high mulligan based on the meta right now, but as a whole, this deck is insanely difficult to beat. Now, I will say before I get too far into this, if you're new to Magic, this is totally not the deck for you. I think I counted 14 mistakes in 3 rounds at Friday Night Magic, and this is me we're talking about. I built the damn deck, so this is a missed trigger deck. You really have to think about everything, but you also have to play as fast as humanly possible because all 3 of the rounds went to the time limit. And that's fine because it tends to go 1 win and then a tie due to the time limit, which is 3 points and the same as winning in 2. But there's definitely no time to run and get food in between rounds. So if you want to just hardcore play for 50 minutes in a row for how many rounds there are at your LGS, this is the deck for you. Now, as I break down the different segments of this deck, you might notice it's pretty darn familiar. That's probably because it's my Avalanche deck, which I'm not sure I ever actually did post on YouTube, mixed with Superland Jr., and honestly, it's better than both of them combined, and I have won lots of FNMs with both. So without further ado, I will open by saying that this is a red-green deck, but it's just barely red. I would call it a splash. I think there's only 2 red spells in the entire deck. Maybe 1, actually. In fact, it is 1 spell, but that 1 spell is double red. Anyway, it's actually a land drop style deck, so of course there's 4 copies of Jaddi Offshoot and 4 copies of Retreat to Kazandu. This is to, use the retreat triggers to bulk up your guys to prevent them from swinging, or to have an 0-3 Jaddi that's preventing them from swinging with 2 attack power creatures. If you get them both out, you could just wildly gain life if it's like a blue-white deck and you don't think they're going to out-damage it, or you could just make a giant 5-8 tree and they just can't swing against it. Either way, by about turn 8, you have all your lands on the field, because besides this life gain stall, you've got your explosive vegetation, which for 4 can put 2 cards directly onto the battlefield, and they are allowed to be mountains. Then, of course, there's Nissa's Pilgrimage. They do both have to be forests, and 1 goes to hand and 1 goes to the field, but that's usually not a problem. You'll probably drop the other one immediately. It's also pretty likely to be qualified for Spell Mastery, so then you'll be putting 2 forests into hand, which guarantees a drop. As you're pulling lands directly out of your library, you're extremely unlikely to pull 1 naturally, so you do want to get that free drop without having to pay for a spell to drop them onto the field. That said, you do want to pay for the 3rd one, which is Nissa's Renewal. 7 life plus whatever you've got going on for life gain per landfall. Normally, by the time you play this card, you've got like a Jaddi and a retreat or 2 retreats on the field. So let's say it's 2 retreats. You gain 7, then 2-2, 2-2, 2-2. So that's a couple life points. This card alone saved me the game. In another game, I actually just played 2 in a row, and they just knew they couldn't win. So if you got your land fetch, you got your life gain, you got your defense. The base mechanic of the deck is obviously Cryptolith Rite. You don't necessarily need it, because if you're not drawing it, you're probably drawing like other control, worse creatures, or other ways to get land and mana. So it's really, really, really flexible. Now keep in mind that Cryptolith Rite does not allow you to tap a creature with Summoning Sickness, but once you can tap it, you're good to go. So obviously 2 of the other cards in the deck are Eyeless Watcher and From Beyond. From Beyond will let you go fetch a giant Eldrazi, which, this deck does as one of the possible win conditions, and it also gives you a Scion every single upkeep. So it's ramp, it's emergency defense chump blocking, and it's also a double trigger, I guess you could say, for Cryptolith, because you can tap the Scion for mana, then sack it for mana. And of course, Eyeless Watcher, it's a 1-1, so once it comes out, it's a useless chump blocker, or you could use Retreat to start putting counters on it in an emergency situation, I guess you could say. Otherwise, those 2 Scions are potentially 4 mana for you. Dropping it out tends to stop an onslaught of a big line of creatures, too. I mean, they know that you could team up with your Scions and Eyeless and, triple block something or quad block it, so it tends to really stall out the game until you get out a giant Eldrazi and win. But there are other win conditions. So you got Crypto, you got Stall, you got the Scion trick. What else is in here? Well, obviously Eldrazi, because a lot of other people are running Eldrazi in a deck similar to this, but this is way more flexible, way more control heavy. First off, we've got Ulamog. Now, if you don't have Ulamog money sitting around, he is extremely powerful with that exile effect, but he actually takes a while to win the game. I mean, you're probably going to have the opponent below 20 health by the time he comes out, but then they probably have chump blockers. He doesn't have trample or anything, so feel free to replace him with anything. I mean, any other Eldrazi. Desolation Twin would probably be my choice. Break of Armies is perfectly legit, and they cost less, obviously. And, really any of the other large Eldrazi. You can just throw anything in, it doesn't matter. They're all going to win the game eventually, especially Desolation Twin, because even if they cancel the spell itself, you still get the token, and then they still have to deal with a 10-10. Under normal circumstances, they have to deal with two 10-10s, and that is a problem. And even though this deck did have Ulamog in it, I also threw in one single copy of Void Winnower. That is hilarious shutdown, and it prevents your opponent from summoning Ulamog. And believe it or not, that did come up, because I was playing practically a mirror match, but against Mono Green at the last FNM, and he got out Ulamog. I had Ulamog in my hand, and then he immediately put out Void Winnower. So naturally, Ulamog is an even spell, so I was completely screwed. So Ulamog, in case they get rid of him, Void Winnower is sort of a backup plan, or if you already drew him, you could go get Void Winnower. You know, they're just a good team. And of course, 11-9 ain't no joke. So besides the big Titan-sized menaces, we've got the fun-sized Tireless Tracker. So he only costs 3, which is the primary reason he's in here. You might have noticed everything costs 4 or more in this deck. I mean, there's a couple 3 cost, but it's pretty much 4 and up spells, and that's a little bit rough, even with, you know, all the land drops, because you've got to get going at a certain point. And so if you kind of get stalled out at 3 mana, you just throw him out there. He's a 3-2. He could kill almost any werewolf in the game. Plus, the little trick that he does is amazing, because if you do have to drop him and you're stuck, just drop in another land, hopefully, that you top deck at a certain point, get a clue, sack the clue immediately, make him too big for them to deal with, they stop swinging, you get another card. I mean, it's just a problem that solves itself. Now, if you have 2 of these on the field, let's say you had to drop one, you're still stuck at 3, you throw a second one out there for 3, and then next turn, you top deck a land. Okay, drop it in, no problem. You get 2 clues, sack them both of the Tireless Trackers get +2/+2 permanently, you get 2 cards. You just went from losing the game to winning the game, so this is an incredibly important part of the deck. It does make it obviously quite a bit more expensive. I think they're like $7 or $8 a piece, but they're definitely worth it. It's emergency card draw, it's even late game card draw, it's just... They could get so massive that they win the game by themselves if you can't get anything else. This is just the perfect card. So you've certainly got some dickish landfall cards in the deck already, but what else is there? Of course, Zendikar's Roil. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 2/2 green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Explosive Vegetation, Nissa's Renewal, or Nissa's Pilgrimage will just wreck people if this is on the field. It does cost 5, so that's a little bit rough. But things do tend to get out of control really quickly when this hits, and it's really just one of the meanest landfall cards in existence. I mean, Omnath will be pretty good too, but he costs 7, and that's more of like a win condition, so I wouldn't put him in the place of like a really mid-range mechanic. The only reason that Zendikar's Roil beat out Zendikar Resurgent, which is really powerful, is because the elementals, if you have Cryptolith out, can tap for mana. Also, this deck is really short on blockers. Oh, and it would get torn apart by individual creature removal, so you really do need this card in there. So besides the Eldrazi, what else can you do with 15 to 20 mana per turn? And yes, that is realistically what you play with in every given game consistently. Well, those astute observers who have seen my last deck know that it's already Rolling Thunder. This is the entire reason that the deck is even red. I roasted a line of 5 vampires with this thing. I've roasted lines of allies with it. I've roasted lines of spirits with it. I've said, hey, that's a nice line of 7 humans you've got there. Boom, kill you instantly by hitting just your life total. Little coming out of nowhere trickery going with this card. I love it. I absolutely love this card. I love everything about it. In fact, the picture is an Eldrazi being lit on fire running for his life. I love it. And I know right now there's somebody down in the comment section right this second. They're not even watching the rest of the video. They're like, you can't just go around misgendering the Eldrazi. Okay, they in the first place do not even have genders. Okay, why are you not either shopping at Target or on Tumblr right now? Why are you on YouTube watching MTG videos? Now, this may surprise some of you guys, but I actually myself personally identify as somebody who doesn't give a crap about what SJWs say. Anyway, let's move on before I get any more thumbs down. So it's a win condition to board wipe a control spell. I love it. It's perfect. It's great. It saves every single game. I wish there was another version of it printed. There actually is one. It has madness, so it's unreliable, so that really kind of sucks. Believe it or not, that's it. That's the whole deck. I mean, there's nothing left but the lands. It's so simple. It just does one thing and wins multiple ways, so they really have trouble adapting and sideboarding their way out of it. I mean, if blue switches to a whole bunch of creature removal because of the Eldrazi and a bunch of, like, summoning negation, boom, you bring out your Rolling Thunder and win with it. Or just win with a giant Tireless Tracker. Or a giant swarm of unstoppable 2/2 elementals, some of which probably have counters on them. Now, the land breakdown is up to your budget. Now, absolutely, no matter what, there's 4 evolving wilds, so there's, 10 cents for you. That's a double landfall trigger, and you usually end up playing it on the same turn as, like, a Nissa's Renewal or something like that. Plus, it can go get a mountain, and this deck is so slow anyway, it just doesn't matter if it comes in tap. Not a big deal. Then you can either do 3 Cinder Glades and 2 mountains, or you could do 1 Cinder Glade and 3 mountains. Believe it or not, those are actually kind of close to each other. It doesn't sound like it, but mathematically they're not that far off. And it's a hell of a lot cheaper, too. And then, of course, there's typically 15 forests, which, depending upon how you built your deck, it might be more or less, but it does have to add up to, believe it or not, 24. Now, there's 3 reasons for this, because this is a really high number of lands. First, you really want to start with 3 lands. I mean, if you start with 2 and you don't draw that third one, you are going nowhere with this deck. So it is absolutely crucial that by turn 3 you have that third land on the field consistently, and honestly you want 4+ on the field by turn 4. Mostly because of explosive vegetation and From Beyond. Or if one of them came in tapped, then you could play Pilgrimage, but 4 is the magic number on turn 4, for sure. Another reason is because you're going to be pulling so many lands out of your deck, usually 15 to 20, believe it or not, in a given game, that you just don't want to run out of it and stop pulling landfall triggers. I mean, you just really want them to be there, and then you'll be down to a really normal percentage of lands a couple turns in because you will have placed like an additional artificial 5 onto the field. Like an artificially high number of lands compared to what you would naturally drop if the deck was a normal deck. That actually kind of was all 3 reasons. You want 3 in your opening hand, you're going to draw them down to a normal percentage anyway, and you don't want to run out of landfall triggers. Those are the 3 reasons. Now, if you really don't want to drop like Void Winnower and Ulamog money, you can actually completely get rid of From Beyond. I would leave Eyeless Watcher because, Scions, that's awesome. And then I would drop in something like Zendikar Incarnate. I mean, that card is absurd, and it's like $1. I think I actually got the foils for $1. I mean, they are dirt cheap. You could also put in Guy's Revenge. That's not a bad card. You can make it extremely Superland Jr. and put in Commune with Lava. You could put in Ulvenwald Hydra. I mean, it's not bad. It's, it's kind of the squelching leeches of the Hydra world, so it's not a bad option. Doesn't have trample, though. Hell, you could put in Plated Crusher. I mean, you could put in anything you want in this deck. Omnath, of course, Locus of Rage. I would put him in the place of an Eldrazi because he's pretty cheap. You can even put that Dragon Master Outcast so that just start putting in 5/5 flying dragons. In fact, he could be in your sideboard if you had the money. So just have fun with the win conditions, based on your local meta. If you think you can get through with flyers better than Eldrazi, because people are all playing Eldrazi removal, go for it. Put in the dragons, no problem. In fact, I think I've seen people play like Dragon Lord Atarka in this deck. So feel free to get weird with it. I think I've got nailed down the ideal configuration of this deck, but it wouldn't be much better or worse with the different win conditions. So feel free to play with it, but I would definitely leave the infrastructure about the land drops, landfall, and the number of land fetch cards, which is very important. I would leave that to exactly what I have it at. I have changed this deck probably 30 or 40 times and played over 100 matches with it. So the other thing with this deck I've noticed is that when people look at the deck list, they're like, this is stupid, gimmicky, and it'll never work. You'll never get it to work together. And then every time they play against it, they're like, whoa. And it's the same thing. If they play a game with this deck, which I've borrowed it to some people, they're like, dude, this acts differently every time, but it wins every time. I can't believe it. So if your opponent doesn't know what's coming, they can't adapt, and that is the key to going 2 out of 3, even though you usually go 1 win, 1 time limit. So have fun with this deck. If you don't believe me, build it on XMage, of course. Talk about that a lot. It's like MTGO, but free. They are not paying me to say this. And I don't even speak German in the first place, but they do have an English version, of course. It runs on Java, and it's not really all that glitchy. It's pretty darn solid. I'm actually on there quite often on the North American server under, of course, the username Desolator Magic. So I hope this deck helps you guys out. I hope somebody shows up to FNM with it. It is just fun whether you win or lose. I mean, because all the matches are really close, and it's just really, really fun to play against. Plus, instead of some win on turn 4 super blitz human combo thing, you're actually giving your opponent a chance to get to like turn 18 and have their deck do what it's supposed to do. You know, instead of just beating them so quick they feel like they didn't even get to play Magic. So it's friendly, it's fun, it wins, and I love it. So have fun with it, and I'll see you guys next video.